Donald Trump's Truth Social account posted a video discussing what would happen if he was reelected, with the newspaper headline referring to a unified Reich, which is a word, of course, associated with Hitler's Third Reich during Nazi Germany. Here's the video. The phrase unified Reich shows up very quickly as part of hypothetical news headlines that announces Trump's hypothetical 2024 win. But if you look underneath the What's Next for America headline, the smaller headline reads, industrial strength significantly increased, driven by a creation of a unified Reich. Trump's campaign spokesperson responded to the backlash, saying that the language was not used intentionally, writing in part, "This was not a campaign video. It was created by a random account online and reposted by a staffer who clearly did not see the word while the president was in court." But the Biden-Harris campaign isn't buying it and blasted that explanation, saying Donald Trump is not playing games. He is telling America exactly what he intends to do if he regains power, rule as a dictator over a unified Reich. I think they took the post down now, Joe.
Yeah, just took it down right now. John Heilman, this is the sort of thing. Of course, they explained it away. They kept it up. We understand from Alex, they just now took it down. But this is the sort of thing. Again, if we go back and sort of search through the ancient mists of history, back to 2015. This is the sort of thing that if any politician, any candidate, any presidential nominee especially, had unified Reich on something that they reposted, the campaign reposted, the sound you would hear would be brakes screeching to a halt. There'd be controversy. People would be talking about it for a week. People would be fired. Here, it's like a yawn, a unified Reich, and they repost it and keep it up for quite a while. I'm surprised they took it down. Yeah, it's just, again, the fact, we were talking about this earlier, the fact that a lot of formerly mainstream voters don't care that there is a candidate out there that talks about being a dictator from day one, talks about executing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff because he's not loyal, talks about putting members of the press in jail because they're critical of him, talks about being able to use SEAL Team 6 to execute political opponents, and said the law can't do anything to him while he's president of the United States, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have people that are just quietly, numbly sleepwalking towards authoritarianism, and they're perfectly fine with it.
10 years, basically, of Donald Trump in our political life, and we have defined deviancy down, Joe. It's just the reality of the situation. A lot of things have been normalized, and one of the ways in which Trump's perpetual lies have benefited him is that people don't take seriously a lot of the things he says. That people just say, well, you know, Trump, he's always talking crap. I mean, who knows? He's never going to do these things. And I think one of the challenges of this election cycle is to make people understand something that Jim Comey was talking about earlier on the air, which is Donald Trump in a second term is more dangerous than Donald Trump in a first term. He now knows how to operationalize some of the ideas he had no idea how to execute last time around.
Yeah. And Alexei, you just wonder what impact his next term, if he gets it, would look like, even when it comes to our jobs and to the people who have stood up to him. He is, and his people are vowing to come after him.
And we should absolutely believe that is the case. He's vowed to sue NBC News and Comcast and media organizations that are critical of him or even write things that he just simply finds unflattering. I mean, it's a disaster. He's sued his way through life. He's lived his life by filing lawsuits, and I think he's built a list of enemies that we all know to be true. We've seen folks even like Bill Barr who come out against him and then say, actually, I guess I'll support him after all.
Right.
And so, you know, the enemies that he's made, they know to go back to him. There are so many people on that list that we don't even know.